Morning Year 6, we are going to read chapter 11 and chapter 12. So chapter 11, Flint. Flint sat in the hammock in his bedroom, watching the large evening light beyond a circular window. A turret leaning out to the side of the treehouse that he, Tomkin and Blue lived in. Flint's bedroom was more of a laboratory, really. Curved walls which were lined with wooden cupboards, and inside there were hundreds of bottles, jars, test tubes and funnels filled with bubbling liquids. They were inventions still in progress, and Flint always left the cupboard doors open when he was at home. It was important to keep an eye on his contraptions, just in case they misbehaved. He plucked at the silver strands that made up his hammock. He had spun it from moonlight, the gossamer of rare, almost extinct, Flint suspected, ice spiders, and after several weeks of experimenting and consulting the bark which bore the carvings from Erkenwald's magic, Flint had discovered that the strands guaranteed glorious dreams. So his hammock is made from spiders' webs, but magical spiders, and they guarantee that he has like amazing dreams. He gazed at some of his other creations lining the upper shelves, a football made of caribou hide means skin, and stuffed with a knot of wind which travelled so fast that when you kicked it, it was almost impossible for any opponent to stop. A clock that read the weather, not the time. It poured snowflakes and fluttered sunbeams and oozed mist. A wooden chest in which he had trapped a thunderstorm, with the result that it let out a loud burp every now and then. And a pinch of stardust, and if unleashed at precisely midnight, the chest rained silver coins for a month. He sighed. There were lamps lit by sunbeams and rolls of string made from coils of mist, but something remained locked inside this turret, usually behind closed cupboard doors, so that Tomkin didn't fly off the handle when he saw the invention still very much existed. Flint swayed back and forth in his hammock and wondered whether it was only the magic that Tomkin distrusted. It felt a little as if he might be him as well. "What's wrong, Flint?" came a little voice from among the cushions on the floor. The cushions were snow clouds dusted with sunbeams that Flint had invented for comfort and warmth, and Blue was a huge fan. She hurled one at Flint, but missed, and several jars toppled off a shelf. "Shh," Flint whispered, leaping out of his hammock to check that none of the jars had cracked. He placed them back where they belonged. "Tomkin's having a meeting in the kitchen with Blade, and, I've told you before, you're only allowed to come in and see my inventions if you keep very, very quiet." Blue giggled as Pebble chewed on a cushion. It had been half an hour at least since his last meal, and the fox pup was already feeling peckish. Peckish means you're hungry. Blue lifted Pebble into her lap, and Flint flopped back onto his hammock. You sad, Flint? I know you sad." Flint turned a magnifying glass over in his hand. It was infused with rainbow essence and could pick up footprints in the snow long after they had vanished from the naked eye. He'd used it earlier that day, reassuring Tomkin that it was the only one of his inventions that still existed, and that it was an invaluable gadget for tracking animals for the tribe. But a small and very guarded part of him had been using it for another reason. Invaluable means it's something you can't live without. It's so valuable. So obviously he doesn't want to destroy it because it's that valuable. He wanted to track Eska's footprints, because no matter how hard he tried to stamp her out of his head, he just couldn't. He thought back to their conversations on the shed. Eska's ideas had been wild and full of cracks, but Flint knew he was a power of wild ideas, and despite what he had said to her, the line between angry and interested had been blurring. What if Eska had been right? What if Tomkin needed more than just spears and shields to stage a successful rebellion? How could he convince a whole tribe to trust in magic again on the word of a strange girl? Flint shifted in his hammock. He'd allowed Eska to be driven out into the wild, where he was sure she wouldn't survive. And though he'd found her tracks earlier that afternoon, there was now a curfew at the labyrinth. A curfew means that where you have to be inside. It's a time where you're not allowed out. Following his unsuccessful mission to Winterfang the day before, and Blade had called Flint back before he could follow them for long. So, for all he knew, Eska might be dead already. Flint swallowed. Outsider or not, she hadn't deserved this. Blue settled the fox pup on her brother's chest, then wrapped her arms around them both. "Hug for you." Flint smiled. "Better?" Blue asked as she drew back. "Better," Flint replied, ruffling her hair. "Always better after a Blue hug." There was a knock at the door, a quick, no-nonsense rap. Flint leapt from his hammock and smashed a hand down on a wooden button on the wall. The cupboard doors closed, immediately hiding all his inventions from sight. Then he shoved the cushions into a trunk, grabbed a spear and polishing cloth, and turned the key in the door. Tomkin stood before him. So he's pretending to shine the spear because he knows that if Tomkin sees any of his inventions, he's going to get really cross, isn't he? And Tomkin wants him to be a warrior. So that's what he's pretending to be. If that's what his brother wants him to be, that's what he'll pretend to be. Yes, Flint asked, rubbing the cloth over the tip of the spear. Lofty's saying he found the tracks of a sleigh pulled by muskox in the forest, Tomkin muttered. Immediately, Flint thought of Esker. There was no way she would have escaped if the Ice Queen had found her. Blade thinks the Ice Queen was here looking for the girl you took from Winterfang. Blue cocked her head. Esker? I liked Esker. Tomkin gave her a stern look. No, Blue, you don't. She and your brother, well, they've got us into a right mess. Blue frowned. Everyone okay? Yes, Tomkin avoided her eyes, but that's not the point. Blue skidded from the room, and Tomkin turned to Flint. We need to be careful when hunting. If the Ice Queen found Esker in Deep Roots, she'll assume one of the tribes helped her or are hiding nearby. There's no sign of the Ice Queen now, but you can bet she'll send her tusk guards back to the forest to search the area. So I'm telling everyone to select hunting grounds wisely and keep watch at all times. Flint nodded. It was an effort to keep his mind on his tribe and hunting when he knew for certain now that Esker was at the mercy of the Ice Queen. Any sign of the girl? He asked as casually as he could. No, Tomkin replied. Lofty turned back at the sight of the sleigh marks. Flint scrubbed at his spear harder, as if somehow that might undo the guilt that he felt inside. He was part of the fur tribe, but Esker's words had made him question his place here. Why, when he tried so hard to harness the mind of a fur tribe warrior, did he end up feeling more and more like an inventor? And why, when the feather tribe might know important things, like how best to fight the Ice Queen, did his tribe insist on cutting themselves off? Flint couldn't help feeling that he was as much of an outsider in this labyrinth as Esker had been. I've doubled the hours on weapon making and added another fighting session before breakfast, Tomkin said. We'll need to be ready for the rebellion soon, and this time we won't lose. With that, he left the room and Flint slumped onto his hammock. He'd been wary of detours after so many failed missions, but he couldn't help feeling that Esker was a detour he should have pursued. Pursued means to go after something. If you pursue it, you keep going after it, regardless of where it might have led him. Esker. Chapter 12. Esker crouched on a stone in the middle of the river, squinting against the glare of the morning sun. She didn't like being out in the open, especially because, until just a few minutes ago, the alley had been ringing with the Ice Queen's anthem, and Esker kept imagining tusk guards sent to drag her back to Winterfang, cresting the summits of the surrounding hills. So cresting means like on the edge of, and the summits means the top. So she's imagining, if you imagine she's in the middle, isn't she? She's surrounded by these mountains, these snowy mountains, and she keeps imagining that the tusk guards are above her, looking down so they can see her. But none came, and she needed to prove to herself that on this first morning here, she could find food. The water rushed around her, clear and sparkling, and she hoped was full of fish, because she couldn't let the eagle do all her hunting. That might be rude, and who knew how long she planned to stay? Maybe it had other nests. Esker focused on the water, her spear hovering just centimetres from the surface. There was a cry from somewhere above her and the eagle's call, and so long as the bird was with her, she didn't feel afraid. Minutes passed, and just as Esker was beginning to think perhaps there wasn't any salmon swimming in the river, a shot of silver scales flashed beneath the surface. She launched her weapon, but in her excitement, it wasn't just the spear she thrusted forward. Her whole body went crashing into the icy water. Quickly she emerged, eyes and mouth wide with shock, and scrambled up onto the bank. Imagine how cold that water would be. Okay, so Erkenwald has like an Arctic setting, doesn't it? And the water has only just started to melt. It used to be solid ice. So imagine how shocked your body would be falling in. The eagle had now landed and stood just a few metres away, and though Esker wasn't sure whether the bird could look unimpressed, she felt that this one did. She scowled at it. I suppose you've seen better. The eagle glanced at the hideaway, even back to the river, and Esker didn't need to speak to the eagle to understand what it meant. Get dry, come back, and try again. A short while later, Esker emerged from her hideaway, dry and warm, but it was nearing midday now, and she still hadn't caught a fish. She walked along the bank, and just as she was getting ready to jump onto the rock in the middle of the river, the eagle squawked. Esker followed its gaze towards the sun, and realisation slowly dawned. My shadow, she murmured. I'll scare the fish. She wandered a little further downstream until she reached a point where the bank was low and the ice had melted from the edge. She knelt down in the snow and waited, and a few metres away, the eagle waited too. After several minutes, though, Esker grew stiff, and she shook out her legs and changed position. The eagle hissed, and Esker went back to waiting. When 10 minutes passed and still no fish emerged, Esker thumped her spear down in the snow. It's no good! But the bird didn't move. It stayed exactly where it was, its feather tucked into place, its eyes locked on the river. Esker sat beside the bird. The seconds drifted into minutes, and she began to notice the silence around her. The whole valley was cloaked in quietness, but the longer she waited and listened, the more the silence spoke. Water murmured, river ice groaned, ptarmigan's wings whirled, and a weasel scampered up a tree. She had somehow overlooked all of this before, and Eska wondered then whether there was more to being a hunter than being big and strong. Perhaps it was just as important to be still, to listen keenly, and to see into the heart of the things that most people had missed. It took over an hour to catch her first fish, but when Eska lifted the salmon out of the river on her spear, her face glowed with pride. "I did it," she laughed. "I actually did it." The eagle ruffled its feathers, and Eska found herself wishing that Flint had been here to see this too. She tried to remember the ritual that he told her about. "Thank you, North Star," she whispered, holding the fish up in her hands and glancing at the sky. "Whether you're up there, and thank you, little fish, for choosing to submit your life to me." She paused. She felt there should be more somehow. "It was especially kind of you, because I was getting really cold and a little bit uncomfortable sitting out here on the snow. So you came along at just the right moment. Thank you very much. I hope," the eagle hissed at Eska. So Eska decided perhaps it was time to wrap up the ritual. "That I have honoured the bond between animals and tribes, even though I'm not strictly in a tribe. Not yet, anyway." She gutted the fish as she'd seen Flint do, and with the eagle lying above her, she walked back to the hideaway. Eska was surprised to see the bird swoop into the opening beside the ice and watch her from the platform as she cooked the fish on her stove. But she didn't shut the door or pretend the eagle wasn't there. Instead, she talked as she cooked, feeling glad for the bird's silent presence. "If you're going to stick around," Eska said, "I'll need a name for you." The eagle yapped, and Eska suddenly wondered whether it was annoyed. "Not because you're a pet," she added quickly, "more because you're here, and I'm here, and..." She wanted to blurt out that she was lonely, that she was scared to go to sleep because of her heart ached even in her dreams, but instead she concentrated on turning the fish. "It would be nice to know your name." The eagle yapped again, and Eska thought she might have misread the sound before, because now that she listened, she could hear the softness at its core. It should sound wild, this name. Eska cut the fish in half, the kind of word the wind might use if it could speak. She looked up. "Because you're like the wind, you know, fast and free and fierce." She thought about the eagle showing her the hideaway and teaching her to fish. "You're kinder than the wind, though." She edged forward and placed half of a fish on the rock outside of the hideaway. The eagle stayed where it was, and it was only when Eska looked away and began to eat her own portion that the bird tucked into its share. As they ate, Eska glanced at the eagle now and again. The wound from the snare was healing already, and the minutes drew on. Eska felt something familiar stir inside her. The bird was proud and strong, but it was also protective of her, at least, and its character felt like a trait she'd once known. A memory flickered that then slipped from Eska's grasp, but a word remained, a word that was unmistakably female, and that to Eska really did sound like the language of the wind. "Balapan," she whispered, and at the name, the eagle looked up and turned around as if it had been waiting for Eska to say that word from the very first moment that they had met. Okay, so in that chapter there, she's starting to remember, isn't she? She's starting to get flickers, and she almost has this familiarization with the eagle, and the word Balapan has come to her. And obviously the eagle has recognised that it's his name. So yeah, we've got another character, Balapan. How exciting! So like, subscribe, all of the things that the kids say. Very cool. And obviously we'll be back on Monday with the other chapters. So have a lovely weekend and stay safe. Want to say bye? Bye.